of the planet, the people who matter, are standing by ready to tell you, through us, what you tell us you want to know about what they are doing to each other, us and you.
I think the thing that's so impressive about him is his work ethic. I don't think he's ever wasted a moment of his life. He's always been thinking, creating, working, spinning his yarns.
I have a histrionic personality. If there's a limelight, I will somehow manage to get myself into it.
Incredibly funny, hysterically funny, brilliant, we all know. So skilled and like a juggler with words. Disciplined, incredibly hardworking, and really loyal.
Clive James was a poet, critic, author and TV star. At the heart of everything he did was his way with words.
A writer is what I am, and I probably wouldn't have been very good at anything else.
I was born in Kogarah, Sydney, in 1939. And the other big event of that year was the outbreak of World War II. My father was a mechanic who spent most of the 30s out of work because the Depression hit Australia so hard. My mother worked on the production lines, and they had a tough life, and they had to wait for a while before they had me.
Clive James was raised by his mother. His father survived a Japanese prisoner of war camp only to die in a plane crash on the way home to Australia.
I got the sense that nothing was nailed down after that. And I also got the sense that I had to have the life that they might have had, a productive life.
One of his first big decisions was to change his given name.
My mother and father called me Vivian after a Davis Cup tennis player in the 1938 team called Vivian McGrath. And then about a year later, Gone with the Wind came out with Vivian Lee in it, and my sufferings began because I had this girl's name. And I got chased by other boys and beaten up, and eventually I got sick of it. And about the age of 8 or 9, I asked my mother for another name.
At Sydney Technical High School, Clive excelled on the debating team. Then, studying at the University of Sydney, he befriended a group of like-minded students, which included Robert Hughes, Germaine Greer and Leo Schofield.
It was a time when a lot of a particular group of people were more interested perhaps in theatrical work and just talking about art and performance and actually getting degrees, but Clive managed to do both.
He looked burly, and all the undergraduate men, he's 10 months younger than me, 10 months. The other men were kind of willowy compared to Clive, who was a block, and he was quite proud of how tough he was.
What do you do, Clive, at the university?
I study English literature.
Oh, you're a poet, that kind of thing.
That sort of thing.
You've got a book there by the famous On the Road by Kerouac.
Jack Kerouac himself, yeah.
Would you read it?
Already the literary critic was emerging.
But when I read this, I'm not making any overt criticism of it. I'd just like you to notice, for one thing, this superfluity of adjectives, which seems to me to indicate a lack of discipline.
He was always a bit of a jokester and very a womanizer in a sense. He found women fatally attractive, and a lot of people found him extremely attractive, even though I thought he used to always say I looked like Mr. Potato Head, but he knew he had something in terms of sexual attraction, but he also had a great wit and drollery about him. He was always the funniest company.
Because a novel really is an expanded poem in the sense that...
When I first met him, he didn't look as if he'd fit in with us at all. He was much too athletic, much too open-faced and bouncy, wasn't cynical at all. He was just a nice guy from the suburbs starting a university career.
Catherine Cummings has experienced some twists and turns since her days at Sydney Uni. Back then she was John Cummings, to whom Clive James dedicated his second autobiography.
In his third year at university, he was the literary editor of the student paper. And I have the bound volume of that year, and there is a lot of Clive in there doing interesting things and funny things.
I could write a bit. I had this turn of phrase. I was smart enough by then to know that my turn of phrase is what I had going for me.
At the age of 22, the young writer set sail for the UK.
Now, he actually came over on the same boat as Bruce Beresford and my ex-wife. They were all together. I remember meeting the bus at Earl's Court Station. And he obviously drifted to Cambridge and then knocked about the London scene until he scored the wonderful job of television critic.
Melvyn Bragg was extracting, drop by drop, a fascinating interview from Harold Pinter.
Yes.
It was exactly like getting blood out of a stone.
After a decade as the TV reviewer for London's Observer newspaper, the critic stepped in front of the camera, hosting a string of programmes.
Good evening and welcome to a brand new series of the talk show Writing Wall Celluloid.
It's all true. Rio really has got hills like waves, waves like hills, and more beautiful girls than a man can count without going blind.
He knew he could write essays and poetry and memoirs and critiques, and also, but he didn't know he could do television, and I think he was really delighted that he could. He got a bit sick of himself on television, but he wanted to prove he could be really good at it. And the other thing was he wanted the security of money. It was his cash cow.
Strapped to a wooden framework from which they can't escape, they are dusted with powdered fish food. Hungry catfish wait in the river for the contestants to join them for lunch. Those who drown are not allowed to go forward to the next stage. There'll be more harmless fun next week.
And looking as beautiful as possible myself, I did my celebrated impersonation of a wine waiter in order to gain access to Frank Sinatra's dressing room. We were eyeball to eyeball with no intervening lawyers.
Can you hear me, Zsa Zsa Gabor?
Yes, darling, I can hear you.
He wrote so many serious things, but essentially what I'll always remember about him is his tongue-in-cheek and his witticisms, his ability to make any situation sort of funny if he needed to, or to be a satirist without being a bitch.
Stare spreading the news. I live in today.
A man could spend his life up here. And then he looks out of the window and asks himself, why didn't I spend my life down there?
Clive James may have travelled far and wide, but he loved the nation of his birth and paid regular visits.
Yes.
My imagination was formed in Sydney. I see in colours because Sydney was brightly coloured. I see through clear light because Sydney had clear light.
There was no shading or confusion in his relationship with Australia. He would come here, he would visit his mother, he would go to any restaurant that was on a harbour and he would sit in the blue. And he wasn't just known as the kid from Kogarah, he was that person.
Oh, it's still me. Oh, and there's no question of it. The kid from Kogarah is sitting before you.
Clive James was diagnosed with emphysema and leukemia in 2010. 5 years later, in an interview with the ABC's Philip Williams, he reflected on his long goodbye.
I more or less promised Kerry O'Brien, I think it was last year now, I'm sorry about this, Kerry, but I more or less promised it would be the last interview and I would totter away and die in the garden. And guess what, I didn't. And then last year I wrote a poem about that maple tree outside the window there, and promising that after it burst into flame in autumn, that would be the end of me. And guess what? It wasn't. I suppose I should just shut up. There has been a change in the last year. My leukemia came out of remission, but this new drug was ready. And now I really don't know when I'll be finished.
But in my mind, the fires are dying fast. Breathe through a scarf. Steer clear of the cold air. Think less of love and all that you have lost. You have no future, so forget the past.
I actually said something to him that he put in a poem, which I only found this morning, which has absolutely choked me. It just, I I'm so determined not to cry.
Germaine Greer discovered that Clive wrote the poem Sentenced to Life after the two of them had been talking about Australia.
I said to him that morning, you know, do you want to go home? And he said, well, yes, but I can't go because I'm too sick. And I said, it's strange, isn't it, that it doesn't really matter where we end up, that you will always dream the skies of home. Oh, I can't bear this. I don't want to cry about it. I said, you never really leave. And that's what it says in the poem.
Procedure for disposal. It may not come to this, but if I should fail to survive this year of feebleness,
Clive James wasn't well enough to make that one last trip to Australia. But when he wrote of his final journey, he wrote of coming home.
If I, that is, should finally succumb to these infirmities I'm slow to learn the names of, lest my brain be rendered numb with boredom even as I toss and turn, then send my ashes home, where they can fall in their own sweet time from the harbour wall.
Hi, I'm Lee Sales. Thanks for watching this story. If you'd like to watch more of 730's stories, they are on the left of your screen. And tap on the button below to subscribe and get the latest from ABC News.